So up until about 20, 30 years ago, if you were a Jew from Iraq, Jews from other places referred to you as a Sephardic Jew, which is a bit strange because the Jews from Iraq have nothing to do with Spain, in the sense that Jews went to Iraq, what today is Iraq, in the time of the Babylonian exile. And technically speaking, there were Jews already there in what today is Iraq in 732 BCE, when I want to say it was Tiglath-Pileser III or somebody like this. One of the Assyrian emperors invaded northern Israel and took Israelites exile to what today is Iraq, right? So that's 732 BCE. So why would you call them Sephardic Jews? Because what happened is in 1492 and then in 1497, in Portugal, you have Jews that are fleeing, right? Because even in Portugal, there were Jews who were able to escape. And they're going all over the world, and a lot of them, and this is the intellectual elite of the Jewish world. So you have rabbis who are some of the top rabbis in the world, the most educated Jews in the world, certainly in Jewish subjects, end up getting on a boat in the middle of the night and sneaking out, and they're like, where do I go? And they end up in Iraq. A lot of them end up in what's the Ottoman Empire. That's how they end up in Iraq. And so they end up in different parts of the Ottoman Empire, which is like, oh, Jewish merchants, that sounds great. People who can read and write. That, we don't trust our own people, so we'll have them do our accounting for us. And that's not a joke. That's actually what they did, right? So you have Sephardic Jews who are literally from Spain, from Sfarad, who end up as this intellectual elite going to Egypt and Syria and to some extent to Iraq. But where they really were heavily concentrated was in what today is Western Turkey, Croatia, the Balkans area, right? Greece, right? You have towns, this is incredible. I found this book that was written in Ladino that was published in what today is Izmir, Turkey in the 1800s, right? There were newspapers in Ladino, which again is, you could call it a dialect of Spanish or related to Spanish, right? If somebody read it to you, you would probably understand that if you speak Spanish, or certainly if you speak like Castilian.
So
you understand most of it. So that's being published in the 1800s. It's incredible in Turkey.
When the Jews started coming back to the Holy Land, and what were the Sephardics mostly speaking?
So this is a really interesting thing. So there were a lot of Sephardic Jews, and here's Sephardic in a very broad sense, right? It includes, again, it could be a Jew who's coming from Damascus, but had an ancestor, and they distinguished, right? If you were a Jew in Damascus, you knew if you were a Jew whose ancestors were from Syria or if they were from Spain or Iberia, right? Could be from Portugal, right? So like for example, in Amsterdam, there was the Sephardic synagogue, and then there was the Ashkenazi synagogue, right? And they were separate. In Hamburg, there was the Sephardic Jewish community. Okay, so what were they speaking? So some of them were still speaking Ladino, and there are words, this is really cool. There are words in modern Hebrew that come from Spanish, but really they come from Ladino. So one of the foods that we eat in Israel, it's kind of like getting like chicken nuggets in America. It's called borekas, right? I don't know if you have that food. Do you have that food in your culture, borekas? So borekas is a Spanish word, and it's apparently, right? Even the as ending, you could tell is not a Semitic ending, right? It comes from Ladino borekas. It's kind of like a phyllo pastry dough filled with cheese or potato. Somebody post in the comments if you come from a Spanish-speaking country and you eat borekas.
If I asked my mom, she would probably know.
Yeah, it's probably called something else there. I don't know. Another word is Chanukiah. So the candelabrum that has 8 or 9 branches. So I grew up calling that a menorah or a Hanukkah menorah. In modern Hebrew, that's called a Chanukiah. Chanukiah is a word in modern Hebrew, but it comes from Ladino. And there's a whole host of words that end in iyah in modern Hebrew, and all of those, or most of those, come from Ladino, right? So, and some of them are original Hebrew modern Hebrew constructions. So, for example, and this is really cool. Listen to this example. So, to hitchhike in British English is called to tramp, right? They call it tramping. Or they used to at one time. So Israel was occupied by the British from 1917 to 1948. And so the word came from British English, tramp. Tramp is to hitchhike, to tramp, right? And the place where you catch a tramp.
That's got a whole other meaning these days.
Maybe, but in British English at one time, at least, it meant to hitchhike. So the place where you catch a hitchhiking ride, right, is called a trempiada. So what's this yada ending? That comes from Ladino.
Yeah, that sounds.
Trempiada is a Ladino ending, right, meaning Spanish or Judeo-Spanish, you could call it. Olympiada is the Olympic Games,
Yeah, the Olympics,
right?
Olympiad.
That comes from Spanish, right, or comes from Ladino again, right? So you have a lot of words. I don't know if it's a lot. There's a list of words that come from Ladino and from Jews whose ancestors had come from Iberia who spoke Spanish. By the way, some of them didn't necessarily come from Spain. Some of them might have come from Sicily, which was ruled by Spain, or Naples, which was ruled by Spain, and so they spoke Spanish, right? Because they came from maybe earlier from Iberia. So the Jews a lot of them who came to Israel in the 1800s spoke Spanish. Some of them came centuries before that. We have this really cool thing where there's a rabbi who arrives in Safat in northern Israel in the 1490s, and he was a refugee from Spain. And they establish a Jewish community. It actually becomes the intellectual center, one of the great intellectual centers of Judaism in the 1500s, was established by Jewish refugees from Spain in Safat, or Safed in English. And in fact, what most people would refer to today as Kabbalah, which is kind of rabbinical Jewish mysticism, most of that was formulated in Spain, in Safat, in Safed in northern Israel, by Jewish refugees from Spain. A lot of the great works of early modern Jewish literature were made by Jewish refugees from Spain. It really became a major center of Jewish learning because these Jewish refugees were given an open invitation to come into parts of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans ruled. I don't think did they rule Safat already in 1490s? I don't remember. They may have, but eventually they come to rule Safat and northern Israel. I know Jerusalem they took in 1517, but northern Israel they might have ruled earlier. And you end up with them speaking still Ladino up until the 20th century. And then you have a really interesting thing that happens in modern Hebrew. It's really cool. So you have Jews who are coming to Israel, fleeing the Russian Empire, and their native tongue is Yiddish, which is, you could call it a Jewish dialect of German. And they meet these Jews in Israel whose native language is Ladino, which is a dialect of Spanish. And they're like, I don't understand Yiddish. I don't understand Ladino. How can we communicate? Well, we both know Hebrew. And they end up communicating with each other in the marketplace. So the story is, and it's a great story, and it's kind of true, that Eliezer ben Yehuda resurrected the Hebrew language. Yeah. There's truth to that story. But he was
I love that story.
He was only able to do that because there were already people who spoke Hebrew, not at home, right? That's where Eliezer ben Yehuda comes in. They weren't necessarily speaking Hebrew at home, but when they went to the marketplace and they wanted to buy a chicken from another Jew, and at home I speak Yiddish and you speak Ladino, so I go to the market, I go to the shuk, and I talk to you in Hebrew because we don't have another common language. Some of them spoke Turkish and some of them spoke Arabic, but why would they speak Turkish or Arabic, right? It was much easier to speak Hebrew because they had learned Hebrew in synagogue, right? And this was controversial. Some people said, no, we can't use Yiddish when we're haggling over the price of a chicken in the marketplace, right? Literally, right? But then others are like, okay, well, how am I supposed to haggle over the chicken? He doesn't know Yiddish, I don't know Spanish, right? And I don't know Ladino. So this actually becomes really important in the modern rebirth of Hebrew, that you have this massive population of Ladino-speaking Jewish descendants of Jewish refugees, and they encounter these refugees who are speaking Yiddish, and their common tongue is Hebrew. It's beautiful.
Wow. Yeah, that is beautiful.